A couple of words about the OECD. For those who are not familiar with the organization, the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Is based in Paris. It's an intergovernmental organization of 36 member countries from the global north. So we work with developed countries. Problems are different when it comes to water, but it doesn't mean that these countries are problems-free in these sectors as well as in others. And I think in the context of circular economy, it's very interesting to see how all these sectors and policies connect to one another. The OECD, the aim of the OECD is to support countries at different levels of government, national, local, regional, with taking decision and also implementing policies. So the motto is basically better policies for better lives. We hope to contribute to that. And me, I work in a division on urban policies and sustainable development, and I coordinate projects on circular economy in cities, especially looking at the economics aspect and also the governance ones. So, why focusing on cities? As I said, even when it comes to OECD countries, the levels of water security, food security, ecosystem security cannot be given for granted. Why? Because cities are already facing, and are likely to be facing even more in the future, several challenges. First of all, urbanization. By 2050, 70% of the global population will be urban, will be living in cities. So today is already 50% of the global population. Demographic growth by 2050 will be 9.7 million people, which means that there will be an increase in demand for natural resources, including, for example, water. By 2050, there are projections say that water demand will increase by 55%, as well as, for example, demand for food, 60% to cover the needs of the increasing population. This is not all. Annie very well said about the effect on climate change on cities and how this can affect the use of natural resources and also the availability of several resources. And plus, we need also to take into account that all these changes in terms of climate change, demographic growth and urbanization will also require new infrastructure. So by 2050, there is a need of $6.7 trillion per year of infrastructure, including in the water sector. This means that we have an opportunity because of infrastructure that will be needed tomorrow have not been built yet. So what we need to avoid is the linear lock to make sure that this infrastructure can be circular and can use resources can allow the use of resources in a sustainable and circular way. So there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. Circular economy, which is, by the way, not necessarily a new concept, but definitely a new driver, has a potential of $4.5 trillion of economic growth by 2050. There are also social consequences of embracing this new socioeconomic paradigm in terms of, for example, of new skills and new job creations. And of course, there are environmental consequences in terms of sustainable use of resources and decreased pollution. So circular economy has started to be very trendy, a concept that we increasingly talk about, but there is the need of clarification also on the definition, what is circular economy. There are more than 120 definitions of circular economy, which are basically pretty much focusing on the business sector, on the private sector, on what the industry can do. But there is a lot to be said about the role of cities. So what I would like to share with you today is really my preliminary observation from the work that it is going to start in the coming months. But so far I have been talking and interviewing probably more than 70 cities all around the world. And my first message to you when it comes to circular economy, cities and water, is that circular economy is systemic. So water is a part of this system, and it's a key dimension for circular economy to happen in cities as well, but it's not the only one. Cities is affected by several sectors, and vice versa, is affecting several sectors, including, for example, building, code, housing, land use, solid waste management, energy. All these sectors interact in cities, so cities and regions. So my first message is to look at this interaction, maximizing synergy, make sure that whatever we know about water sustainability and how to increase the resilience in cities, it can be used in connection with other sectors, so to overcome silos. So when we don't look at land use, so for example through planning and coordination, then we have consequences on water consumption. Say it comes for housing, same things for the energy sector. This is my first message. The second message is that circular economy is not only a technical thing, and especially when it comes to water, I found that we have lots of knowledge, not me because I'm not an engineer, but we know how to reuse water, how to treat water, how to reduce water consumption, increase water efficiency through technical solution, but it's not enough. If information is not shared, if financing is not available, if regulation is not appropriate, if stakeholders, for example, are not properly involved in discussion, technical solutions are not going to bring the expected result. So what is really key is governance, is basically understanding who does what, why, how, and what can be improved in this sense. And the third message that the city I talked to made me think about is that city at circular economy is transformative. It's not new, as I said, as a concept, but it implies a behavioral change, it implies a cultural change, and also a social acceptance for innovation. This innovation can be technical, it can be institutional, it can be social. For example, in terms of water reuse, there is the need of maybe improve communication and information to people for them to better understand how water can be reused, why, and not only when actually there is a water scarcity or there is a water crisis. So how to get there? In my view, there are three main dimensions that could be taken into account that we call the part of the 3 Ps framework. So one is related to people. There is the need of interaction across people, meaning several categories of stakeholders. So government for sure, but also businesses, citizens, all the stakeholders that can have a role in developing circular economy strategies, which of course will include a role for water, but that will also have an important role in implementing these strategies. There are several examples. Scotland, through the resource forum, for example, is making sure that business has opportunity to develop projects in water, in waste, in energy. There are several other examples connecting private sector and public sector. So we need to make sure that this condition and governance conditions are in place to do so. The second P, as I already stressed, concern the policies. So policies, complementarity. There are several strategies already in place on circular economy. For example, one of the countries, Slovenia. Slovenia is looking at the same time at the soil and water quality. So how to make sure that regulation is appropriate, subsidies or incentives are at the right place to increase the sustainability and circularity in these two sectors. Same for the European Commission, for example, the directive, the Circular Economy Package of 2015 mentioned the role of circular economy in implementing the Water Framework Directive, so to increase water efficiency as well. And the third P, I think is very important, concern places. When I talk about cities and regions, it's not only about the urban core, but it's actually everything that interacts with city. So is the rural area interacting with the urban core, is the neighborhood area, for example, the metropolitan area in which you have several municipalities, and for them there is the need of coordinating policies, people, and several initiatives. So when it comes to water, we also have to take into account the catchment. It's really much a matter of the functional area that includes cities and that include the interaction across several places. Of course, administrative boundaries, geographic boundaries need to take into account, but also the institutions and the stakeholders that administrate, that operate in this boundary, and to make sure that they talk to one another. What is the role of cities in all that? Well, cities, first of all, are laboratory for innovation. I'm sure all of you have come across with initiatives at city level that concern several sectors, including water, which means that innovation in cities is much faster than in any other place. So, for sure, this is one important aspect to take into account. The second is about financing. 64% of climate and environmental investment occur at subnational level. So cities and regions have an important role to play. And the third is that they manage services, water, waste, energy, that are key dimensions for circular economy. So I think it's really important to clarify how this system approach, the circular economy, can happen in cities. Nowadays, I found that we can cluster the role of cities in three types of roles. So one is the promoter. They can promote circular economy strategies by identifying priorities and synergies across sectors. They can be facilitators, so for example, matchmaking, business, and other stakeholders, or maybe creating a sustainable and effective dialogue across the value chain in terms of sustainable production and consumption. And third, they can be enablers. For example, providing soft and hard infrastructure. There are examples like Paris or the metropolitan area of Barcelona that are providing hub for startup. So new jobs, creating new skill, creating capacity building programs, which are fundamental for circular economy to happen. Several cities are already embracing this transformation, so they are moving from linear to circular economy. Of course, there are different levels of maturity in doing that. There are some cities that can be called the pioneers. For example, Amsterdam, London, Paris. It's been years they have been developing strategies, a roadmap to concretely find the way to make the cities more and more circular. There are some cities that are very good at, I call sector specialists, because they are very good in one sector. For example, water, in terms of water use, several examples around the world, and the first one that came up to my mind is Singapore, or maybe cities in the US like San Francisco, like Phoenix. They have very incredible programs on zero waste, but they would, for example, benefit from an holistic view and interaction across sectors. And then there are the newcomers, which are cities that are looking at actually understanding what would imply to enhance circular approaches in their own cities. And the push is basically top-down, for example, a new national legislation as in the case of Korea, or it can be bottom-up. There are several initiatives from cities or from the business sectors that actually make then the local government, the regional government to think that this is something to be taken into account more seriously because can provide a vision for the future in cities. So this is the role of cities, and now just to conclude, we'll very briefly talk about the role of the OECD. So what the OECD can do and all that. The program I'm working on is basically based on three main components. The first one is related to improving the information base in order to make sure that decisions can be taken on solid data and information and indicators. At the moment, there is lots of data related to several sectors, but I think that we need to overcome these silos and we need to make sure that really this is all based on the principles that one cannot improve what cannot be measured. If we have no idea of how how circular a city is or what are the costs and the benefits of these kind of initiatives, then it's difficult for the city to take decision and to improve, for example, what doesn't work in the cities. The second component is about learning. Circular economy is pretty much experimental, but there is a lot going on in cities and in different sectors. So sometimes it's not about reinventing the wheel, but it's more about learning about what the other cities are doing and how, what are the failures, what are the conditions for success. And the third one, which is related, of course, to learning, is about sharing. And the sharing is not only related to the city-to-city sharing, which is very, very important, but it's also related to make sure that there is a flow of information and opportunities across levels of government. Sometimes the cities are taking decisions, they want to innovate, but just like the regulatory framework that we talk about in the previous session is not adequate to support this innovation, or maybe the financial incentives are not adequate. And this, for example, is something that in some cases the cities cannot is not in charge of. So there is the need of coordination across levels of government. I'm just concluding. This is the end of my presentation. I stop here. Thank you.